and she said, I need to see if you are any good at sex. So take a shower with, you know, whatever his name was, John. That was my first. He had a tremendous amount of rage. So that was my first time having that amount of violence. Is he alive or is he dead? Is he alive or is he dead? And I finally aggravated the nurse enough that she said, he's dead. Two of the guys there took turns on top of me. And the second I went through his door, he pushed me, threw me, literally ripped my clothes off, ripped them, didn't pull them off, ripped the clothes off of me, raped me, not as violent as Donna's person, but pretty violent, and said, that was your first month's rent. As soon as I said yes, it was like an unspoken, unseen imprisonment. So there's a warrant for my arrest, and Peter brings me to the police station. I'm sitting in a chair in front of the desk of this policeman, and the policeman asks me how my uncle is doing. So it's the second he said my uncle's name and didn't ask me about him, I knew that he was an abuser. You know, that he was in the ring. He was one of them.
Let's go to that moment where I remember you were talking about a story where your father was going out with a stripper and she was actually grooming you to become a call girl for somebody she knew. Like, what was that all about?
Yeah, I don't remember her name, but I remember what she looked like. She looked like a tall Barbie doll. She had really long, straight blonde hair, and she drove a Lincoln Continental and really nice clothes. I mean, she looked like a Barbie doll. And my dad was being sexual with, I guess they were prostitutes, or I think one girl was a dancer that somehow was in the house once that I remember. You know, my dad was still in love with my mom. He loved her. He kept telling her, even though she was married, come back home, you know, come back home. So he was just meeting his sexual needs with these ladies. But one of them, I was in awe of her because she was beautiful and she seemed independent, confident. And gosh, I think I was 15, maybe 14, somewhere around then. And I said, how, you know, what job do you do? How do you have the life that you have? I saw her as glamorous. And she said, I go on dates. And you could go on dates too. And I said, I don't understand. And she said, why don't you come over to my place and I'll show you. So I went with her in this beautiful Lincoln Continental with white leather seats to her trailer home. And at the time, I didn't have any sort of connotation that a trailer home wasn't fancy. I don't know.
And how old were you then?
Like 14, 15. Okay. So I went with her there, and she had a guy friend of hers come over, and she said, I need to see if you are any good at sex. So take a shower with, you know, whatever his name was, John. Take a shower with John. And John said, right this way, kind of thing. And it was a very nonchalant thing. Okay, I'm going to take a shower with a stranger named John. Okay, you know. And so I take a shower with him. He asked me to give him a blowjob. I do. We get out of the shower, go back into the kitchen, whatever. And he said, she's excellent. She'll do. Hire her. And the Barbie doll, you know, I'll just call her Barbie. Barbie said, okay, so tomorrow you'll pack up your things and I'll come by after your dad goes to work, and I'll take you and I'll show you the ropes and teach you everything you need to know. And you'll stay with me for a little while until we find a place of your own. So for me, having a place of my own and being independent, away from my dad, away from predators, was very appealing to me. So I go home, and then at home I'm thinking, am I going to be safe? Like, I don't really know her. So, and I wanted to say goodbye to my friend. So I skipped school a lot, and I would go to the local 7-Eleven at the end of my block. And I was friends with a lady there named Donna who worked there, and she always let me buy cigarettes. So I'd buy my Marlboro, hard pack of cigarettes and a Three Musketeer bar at the time. And so I go to talk to Donna, and Donna said, "That's called prostitution. And that's not going to happen. You are not going to be prostituted." And I'm like, what does it matter? And she said, "I'm leaving. I have a child that my brother and his wife have been taking care of, and I'm going to pick her up." And I don't remember her whole story, but I'm going to pick her up in upstate Florida and then drive to my parents' house in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. My brother lives there with his girlfriend and their new baby. My parents said that me and my daughter can stay there while they're in Florida for the winter time. You're coming with me. And then we went to my house and threw my clothes into the, trash bags, and got into her car and went to her trailer. And she had already said goodbye to her friends. But one guy that had been pursuing her for quite some time knew that this was his last chance to make a play for her. And he came over with some cocaine, and I was going to sleep outside on the carport. And he was inside with her, and they were doing cocaine. And I in hindsight, I think he thought if he got her high, he would finally get to have sex with her, and he would, met his goal. So he was with her for quite some time. I fell asleep face down outside, and he evidently was not successful with her. So when he walked out of the trailer, he was furious. He was coked up, he was horny, and he was furious. So I'm asleep face down. So he came over to where I was sleeping, took his hand on the back of my head, held my head down, ripped my pants down, flipped me over, held me down, and he raped me from behind, and then flipped me over and raped me that way. And then as soon as he ejaculated, threw my body down, just sort of, and left. And I laid there. That was that was my first violent. I mean, I had been molested, I had been raped, but that was my first. He had a tremendous amount of rage. So that was my first time having that amount of violence. And I did not tell her. I did not call the police, because that's not what I did. That's not what some victims like me. So the next morning, I stayed awake. The next day, we packed up her stuff and my trash bag of clothes, and we went to her brother's place in Florida. He had a business of, back in the day of Burt Reynolds, they would do they would put the big eagle, paint. So that was his business, was doing designs on people's car at the time. And so we were there, and he was married, and he was gentle and very kind man. We were there for one day, one night, and that night I used every trick I knew how to use to have sex with him, because he was kind. And so I did everything I could, and he refused to have sex with me. And the next morning, my friend Donna said, I heard you in part of the night coming on to my brother. I want you to know that he's happily married, and I'm proud of him for not giving in to you. You were relentless. She said, you don't need to do that anymore. You're safe with me. You don't need to do that anymore. And before we left, I saw his swimming pool in the light of day, and they had accidentally killed an alligator that had babies. And so they took some of the babies that they could scoop up and brought it home, waiting for the babies to get big enough to let go. And there was one baby that I took and put in a Pampers box. I named him Melvin, and Donna, Melvin in the Pampers box, and me set off for Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, there was a big, beautiful home, and the parents were in Florida. The family were pretty conservative Christians, even though her brother was not married, had a girlfriend and their new baby. And that was in one section that had an apartment. And then Donna and I and her daughter, Misty Spring, were in the other part. But a part of the agreement for staying there was that we had to go to the family church, which was the Cape Girardeau First Church of God. So I knew that we had to go to church. That was a part of the agreement. She also had like an uncle. So her brother immediately started having sex with me, mutual, fine. And then her uncle had one of those, I forgot what they're called. It looks like a station wagon and a truck. You know, the front of it looks like a station wagon, and the rest of it is just this open whatever it was.
I think it's a Dodge van or something like that. It's like
nope. There's a word for it, but I couldn't. Those used to trigger me for a long. They don't trigger me anymore, but they triggered me for a long time. So
why? Because they were
because
rapes?
The uncle would have sex with me in that,
okay.
and I didn't want to have sex with him. But I'm living here, and I would have sex with him, have sex with the brother, and I'm going to the Cape Girardeau Church and the First Church of God, and they had a revival. And I had never in my life seen a revival. We really weren't, you know, I was christened in an Episcopal church. We only went to church like once a year for Easter. So this was quite an experience to see a Missouri Bible Belt revival. And I thought, this is amazing. And I did want to be purified, and I did want salvation. And so this was my first call to Christ, you know. So I went down and agreed to be saved, and it was a beautiful experience for me. And then, like the following Sunday, we went to a river and got baptized in a river, and they gave me a little white Bible. And then there was a turkey shoot. So I'm having sex with two people, two men, and then one of the men, the uncle, actually had me come over to his house one night and told me to go into the next room where a friend of his was going through a divorce and have sex with him. So I left his bedroom and I went to the other bedroom and said, I'm supposed to be for you. And the guy said, you're 15 years old. Go, you know, get out of here, you know. So one of her friends did not like me and thought that it was wrong that they were housing a runaway, and thought that Donna and her family should call the police. Donna and her family weren't going to call the police, so she did, but we didn't know that. So I'm at a church turkey shoot with my Marlboro cigarettes in the bathroom, smoking a cigarette, and this girl came in. I saw the police car out the window, and she said, the police are asking for you. And I said, you can have my cigarettes, right? And I went down and said, okay, put on the cuffs. And he looked at me and he's like, I'm not putting on the cuffs. I don't even know what this is about. This is Mickey Mouse bullshit or something like that. And he took me to a juvenile detention center, and it was all boys in the juvenile center. So they put me in isolation. And the boys were talking at the bottom of the door. What are you in here for? And so I told them that I killed my grandfather, chopped him up and put him in a meat grinder. And that's what I would do to them if they tried to hurt me in any way. And then the next day, they said that my mom, probably my dad, had paid for a flight. And they were flying me from Cape Girardeau, Missouri to, I think, Boca Raton, Florida. And I went home to my mom. And my mom tried to put me in high school. But I had no business being in high school. So she signed me up for Boca Raton High School. And I went to went to some classes, and I didn't fit in.
What grade were you in at that point?
That would have been 9th grade.
Okay.
So I went for a couple weeks. There was one nice guy, and I don't even remember the class. His name was George. And it's sort of like a flock of chickens. When one chicken is sick or vulnerable, the other chickens peck it to death. So it was like that. Like I went to school, and these, Boca Raton, very affluent area, are looking at me like, kill her, But George was very kind to me. And this was all within a month, a very short amount of time. And George it was his birthday, and he said, let's get out of here. And he did motocross bikes, and I think, somebody big supported him, funded him. So he was, I guess, pretty good at the dirt bikes, and he had a dirt bike. And so he and 3 other guys, so 2 bikes, 4 of us, 2 other guys, went to George's house to get pot or alcohol or something to celebrate George's birthday. And at George's house, there was like a 5th of some kind of alcohol. I don't remember what it was. And he just started gulping it down, and because they couldn't find pot. And I said, school's almost out. I have to go home. Why don't we go to our homes and then come back together, see if we can get people together and have a party? And George said, that's a great idea. I said, I don't want you to take me home because you've been drinking. I don't want you on the bike. And so one boy said, I'll take you home, Kathy. So I get on the back of his bike, and we leave George's house, and George and the other guy pull up beside us, and George is like, I'm going to escort you home, And so George speeds up, gets in front of us, goes to take the curve in the road. His kickstand falls down, I guess, they said. The bike flew up in the air. The one guy in the back went skidding down the road beside us. George went skidding up the road and off the road, and the bike just, flew out. So we pulled over, and I jumped over to George. His face was turning blue. I got his helmet off. I tried to give him mouth to mouth, but nothing's happening. So he was kind of in the yard of somebody. So I went to the door, and I just opened the door, and there was a lady standing there with a towel. She had obviously just gotten out of the shower. And I said, please call an ambulance, call the police. And then the ambulance came, and they whisked the boys away. And the guy that I was on the bike with and I followed the ambulance to the emergency room.
The bike that you were on, he wasn't intoxicated or anything like that.
No,
right?
no.
Okay.
I don't know if he drank or not. I don't remember. But so we get to the hospital, and they're not telling us anything. And I was until the night when my dad died, I was a very quiet person. I had been beaten down, so I was pretty rolled in and quiet, Very few times did I assert myself. And finally, I was just hitting the desk and saying, is he alive or is he dead? Is he alive or is he dead? And I finally aggravated the nurse enough that she said, "He's dead." So I turned around and walked out. And by that time, the guy that I was on the bike with, his dad had arrived, put the bike in the back of the van thing that he had, gave me a ride to my home. And I had dinner with my mom, and I must have told her what happened. The next day happened to be Friday.
What happened to the guy that went backwards?
He like lost a kneecap or something.
Okay.
And as I was walking out, the priest was walking in. So that was Friday. I go to school, and when I got out of the bus and started to walk, there's the place where all the kids smoke cigarettes, and then you're off school property, and then you go on school property. Well, the off school property where people were smoking, which is where I hung out, the bad kids, girls were crying, everybody was, upset, and, the girls are sort of hovering to each other, and they saw me, and they just pointed at me, and they said, "You killed George." That was my cue to leave, and the boy who I was with on the bike, he was there, he saw, and so he and I went to an apartment complex that had lots of predators, a poor area, and we just hung out there and talked and smoked until the end of school. And then at the end of school, I went home. My dad came to pick me and my brother and sister up for his weekend, and we were almost home. It's about a 45-minute drive from Boca Raton to West Palm Beach. And by the time we were almost there, my dad said, "Well, I talked to your mom, and she said you are too wild for her to control, and she doesn't want you living with her anymore. You are going to live with me." And it was like moments later that we pulled into the drive. I jumped out of the car, went to the phone, called my mom, and said, "You didn't even, tell me, to my face." And she said, I can't have you here. You can't be here." And I said, "Okay." And so now I'm living with my dad again. Oh, joy.
So, so did this happen before the stripper incident with the call girl, for grooming you as a call girl? I'm just trying to find the timeline here. So hold on. So you're back with your dad, and then that's when all that happened afterwards, right? So this is the
No, so all of that happened. I moved back in with my dad.
Okay.
Because I left.
You left your dad.
Yep.
You went off with Donna.
Yep.
And then you got sent back to your mom.
Yep.
And then you go back with your dad.
My dad.
Okay, got it.
Right before we go to Maine, where I run away again and get sex trafficked.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Okay, so that's the part that I wanted to connect there, because when you left with Donna, you had left your dad's. Mm-hmm. Then the episode with Donna happened, and then the police came and get you at the turkey shoot, right? Mm-hmm. Then you got sent back to your mom. Mm-hmm. At that point, that's when the George incident happened. Then your mom just said, "She's just too much." And then you're right back to your dad. Mm-hmm. And now we're about to come up to the point where you're gone for good and you get sex trafficked. Mm-hmm. Got it. There are two things I want to clarify before we end that period of time. One thing I remember in the story, you had said that you cannot handle any kind of drugs,
right,
or alcohol.
Right.
So during that whole time when you were partying, because you're not going to be drinking when you're 5 or 6, you never took drugs, you never took painkillers, you never drank alcohol?
I tried.
Okay.
So like in Boca Raton during that, when I was trying to go to 9th grade, I met a girl named Tina DeLuca, and she was the only girl that sort of took me under her wing. She was nice to me. Her parents were lawyers, I guess, and anyway. So she was nice, and we would skip school together and go to that apartment complex where the predators were. And at that time, there was a drug called Quaaludes that was happening at the time. They don't make those anymore, but at that time they were. Flight 714, Quaaludes. And so I have tried acid, I have tried Quaaludes, I have tried speed with Tina, and everything was a bad trip. So like Tina gives me 2 Quaaludes over at that apartment complex. Somebody was moving into one of the apartments. Everybody was sort of hanging out over at their house. They were putting the waterbed together, and I wasn't dating anybody or anything. And Tina gave me a couple of Quaaludes, and I laid down on the waterbed, and the waterbed's sort of in the living room. It's a studio apartment, and I don't know the boys. I don't know any of the people. All I know is Tina. And I took the Quaaludes, I laid down on the bed, and I couldn't move. I couldn't move. I was just like dead weight. Like my mind was awake, you know, I could see and hear and comprehend, but I couldn't physically move. And somebody said, "She looks like she wants to have a good time." And somebody said, "Let's go for it." And I didn't say or do anything. I was just
limp.
So two boys, 2 of the guys there, took turns on top of me with the door open, people coming in and out.
How old were you here?
16.
Okay.
Yeah. And similar to my losing my virginity, you know, it was like a gang of people. Here we go. So these 2 guys took turns on top of me, and I couldn't say anything or do anything. And some of the people were like, "This is disgusting. She's such a fucking whore," right? And they're walking out or whatever, you know. And when they were done with me, Tina was mad at me. I don't even know how I got off the bed. I don't know. But somehow I got off the bed and stumbled to the cement stairs, and I started throwing up. And Tina had came by, and I said, "Is this blood that I'm throwing up?" And she said, "No, that's whatever it was." And she was disgusted. "Why didn't you say no? Why didn't you?" And I'm like, I can't move. I couldn't move. So that was my experience with any kind of drug was not the way other people. Secondhand pot smoke gives me a panic attack. Speed, you know, it just even today, Tylenol, Novocaine, anything like that has a really profound effect on me. So shoulder surgery, 2 meniscus tears, ice and Advil. So I just can't.
Gosh. I think that's an important point as we go into you leaving your father's house one final time. What was that turning point where you said, "I'm off," and then you go into the sex trafficking ring?
Yeah, so that final time leaving, that time we were in Maine. Dad was getting ready to fly back to Florida, or to drive back to Florida. It was the end of the season with the camps, and Tina had come up to Maine and had lived with us for a short amount of time, but my dad was trying to have sex with her. So she's like, "I can't, you know, I love you, but I can't take living here anymore. So I have a boyfriend named Rick. I'm going to live with Rick now, so I'm going to stay in Maine." And she said, "You can come and live with me and Rick." And I said, well, I don't want to go back to Florida. Florida is not my fun place. I want to stay here. And she said, well, run away. And we made a plan that I would have my trusty trash bag of clothes, and I'd be at the end of the driveway, and she would come and pick me up, and I would stay with her and Rick. So that was the plan. And we were going to do that like the day that my dad had planned to drive to Florida. So that way he wouldn't hang out and wait for me. So I did. I had my bag and I was at the end of the driveway, but Tina didn't pick me up. Rick did. And Rick said, and when I was a runaway, once that perpetual motion started, there was no stopping. You know, and I don't know how to explain that, but just once you shot that bullet, you couldn't take it back. So even though Rick showed up and I could have just turned around and went back to the house, that never felt like an option. You know, like once I started, I had to continue. Mm. So Rick picked me up and he said, listen, you can't live with me and Tina. I'm not taking you in. But I have some ideas. I'm working on a plan. So tonight I'm going to bring you to a hotel, and then tomorrow I've got a place for you to stay, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. So he brought me to Saco, Maine at the Wagon Wheel Hotel, and I spent the night there. And in the morning, true to his word, he showed up and with a cup of coffee and I think a donut. And he brought me to the sidewalk that runs right in front of the courthouse. And he pulls up, and just perfect timing, his friend Paul was walking by, and Rick's like, Paul, over here. And Paul came over and he looks through the driver's side window and checks me out, and Rick's like, this is the girl I was telling you about. And Paul checks me out and says, okay, I'll take her. She can stay with me. And what I didn't know was that Paul was an abusive rapist and was a drug dealer. So, and I don't remember if I got into Paul's car or if Rick dropped me off at Paul's house. I don't remember how I got there. But in the town where Paul lived, Biddeford, there was one section of streets that were the worst. And one of them is called Pike Street. And on Pike Street, there was about halfway up an apartment building that had a basement apartment. And that's where Paul lived. And it was a crappy, building, maybe 4 stories, including the basement. So I went into the basement apartment with Paul, and the second I went through his door, he pushed me, threw me, literally ripped my clothes off, ripped them, didn't pull them off, ripped the clothes off of me, raped me, not as violent as Donna's person, but pretty violent, and said, that was your first month's rent. So now, up until that point, I hadn't been in that sort of living situation before. It was a pretty yucky one. And I don't remember how long I was there with Paul, but there were other people in the building. And one person was this lady, her last name was Joy, J-O-Y. And her family lived in what would be an apartment building that was within 6 months of the time I'm telling you about. This house, this building was condemned and torn down. So it was really really awful apartment building. And her family lived there, but she was dating somebody in my building. And the Joy family were so kind. They gave me food. There was a lot of them living in a small space, little kids sleeping in the same bed, 4 people in a bed. And I had made a tattoo a homemade tattoo with their name in it because they were so, I had removed obviously, so kind. We had fried potatoes and tea, and that's what we ate, what we survived on. If anybody had any extra money, you would get, there's a mobile hamburger stand, Rapid Raise, and we would get a hamburger sometimes if we were lucky. But they were really nice to me and fed me. And she was hitchhiking, that their daughter was hitchhiking somewhere, and I went with her. And the truck driver said, do you want to keep going? I'm going to go to Pennsylvania, or do you want to stay? Are you 18? And I'm like, sure, I'm 18. So we dropped her off in New Hampshire, and I did his route with him, an older guy. And I had sex with him the whole way, and then got a urinary tract infection. So he brought me back to Maine, gave me money to see the doctor, and I took that money and I bought food for the Joy family. So I got steaks and hamburger and potatoes and tea and brought them this food, and I didn't want to burden them with me anymore. So I gave them this food sort of as a parting gift, and then I didn't see them or associate with them anymore because I didn't want to be a burden to their family. But there was another group of women, or a couple of women, in that same building with Paul. And I went up to their building, and Paul's not really feeding me. So I'm malnutritioned. I'm a size 4 now. I was 0, and I had stopped menstruating, which is why I didn't get pregnant this whole time. And the two ladies, they were probably kids. I don't remember, but they said, we have our own apartment. We have our own clothes. You should come to work, and do the work we do. They never said prostitution. They never said pimp. But they gave me macaroni and cheese with peas and tuna fish. And when they fed me that food, it was almost like being high. It like hit my bloodstream, and it was just like, okay, what do I have to do to get my own food and my own apartment and not be raped by a crazy roommate and who has drugs everywhere? And they said, just come to work like we do. We go on dates. Our boyfriends make sure that we get our money and that no one hurts us, and we only date who we want to, and we date the nicest guys. And they totally glamorized prostitution, never calling it prostitution. And I said, sure, be happy to meet your boyfriends. I'll have that conversation. So they invited their two pimps, a black guy and a white guy, to meet me. And it was a job interview without calling it a job interview. Didn't have to take a shower with them, but we talked, and the black guy was like Denzel Washington. He was charming and handsome and very charismatic. And the white guy looked like an accountant with a pencil-thin mustache, thick glasses, pocket, and one eye that kind of went off on the side a little bit. And they were known on the street as Salt and Pepper because they were black and white. And
what a great name.
Right? Salt and Pepper. And they said, we'll take care of you. They were very casual. Like this was no big deal. You want to go on dates and get money, we'll make sure you're okay. And for some reason, God job, so many God jobs throughout my life, the God job, I chose the white guy. And I said, yeah, I'll work with him. Little did I know that the black guy was very well known. There's a whole there's a whole web of sex trafficked, now we call it sex traffic, where they kept girls, these houses all over New England, New York, Connecticut, all over the place. And a primary pornography house was in Lowell, Massachusetts, where they did bestiality. So they had Doberman pinchers that they had girls have sex with. So if you didn't follow the rules, that's you would get stuck with doing that job. So I chose Peter Salt, and he was a pimp wannabe. He had already done jail time for embezzlement, and he had a wife and some kids, and he was trying to learn how to be a pimp. And so I was one of his few girls, and as soon as I said yes, it was like an unspoken, unseen imprisonment. You now belong to this man, and you have to do what this man says. And it was like everybody smiling until you said, I'll work with you. And then the smile stopped, the energy changed, and now it was, here are the rules, here's what you're going to wear, we'll get you a false ID. And they did. I was Diana Foster, who was 27. Even though I was, however old I was, 16, 15, however old I was, 16, and 15, however old. And I was now his property. And so he moved me from that place to his personal home with his wife and kids for a small period of time to keep me close. Salt. This is Salt.
Okay.
Yeah, this is.
So he has a wife and kids.
Yep. Young kids.
Wow.
And
did his wife know he was doing that?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
So while I was living with him and his wife, that is an unusual situation, right? So I had been in many unusual situations, but being someone's slave in their personal home was new. And his...
Were you the only... He had other girls, though, so why did...
Not here. At this place, it was just me in his home. He just wanted to keep me close and start the brainwashing technique. So he wanted to keep me tethered, you know, keep close by. So he started the, I don't want to say grooming because it was beyond grooming. It really was a brainwashing thing. So for me, the terrifying motivation is the thought of going to Lowell, Massachusetts. So being taken against my will, drugged, having dogs or animals be sexual with me, being tied, you know, was terrifying for me. So that was the threat. And he would, you know, I'm young, and so he would take me for a drive, a no moon night, and take me out into the country, and then turn off the car and turn off the lights, and then turn the lights on, turn the lights off. And he would say, that is how fast I can make you disappear. Like that. He would take me places and say that he and Pepper have eyes everywhere, and there wasn't any place that I could go or any place that was safe, that that I belonged to him, and that he was everywhere. He would do things like, you know, they live in a neighborhood. They look a middle-income neighborhood, 40-year-old something man and his wife and young children, and he would invite another couple over, another same age, you know, the Smiths over for dinner, and it looked like a normal thing, except after dinner, the kids went to bed, and Peter brought me out and said, Mr. Smith, would you like to have sex with Kathy? Yes. Mrs. Smith, would you like to see your husband have sex with Kathy? Yes. Okay. Kathy, have sex with Mr. Smith, you know. And so right there on the living room floor, I'm having sex with Mr. Smith in front of Peter, his wife, and Mrs. Smith. Just ways of saying, you will do what I say when I say to do it. So up until this point, I would call my mom and dad and let them know that I was alive. But now that I'm with Peter, I'm not making any phone calls. They don't know that I'm okay.
So you have no means of communication, no.
Right. I don't have a cell phone.
No,
It wasn't even a thing then.
Yeah.
And my friend Tina is feeling guilty because I have disappeared. She was supposed to get me. Her boyfriend came to get me. Then I went to Paul's apartment, and then I disappeared. And she has not seen me or talked to me. I'm missing. So she calls my parents or the police, or somehow the police get involved, and I'm a missing person. So they didn't have Amber Alert back then or anything like that. I was just missing. So, and they didn't even have a missing persons sort of thing. It was a warrant for my arrest. So that's how they did it. So if any cop comes in contact with me and they Google, or not Google, but they call in my name, my date of birth, it would say there's a warrant for her. And it was for being a runaway. So Peter found out about that somehow because he was all-knowing, right? Pimp is all-knowing. And he found out that there was a warrant for my arrest.
So they're not bluffing when they say that then, that they control everything.
Yes.
It's not a bluff.
Right. So he's proving it to me so that I will obey without question. So, so for instance, he told me that he busted out of prison. Very few people have busted out of Thomaston Men's State Prison. And he showed me that he had, and he showed me the Christmas card from the warden. So, he's got friends in high places. So there's a warrant for my arrest, and Peter brings me. He physically brings me to the police station, walks inside the police station with me, and there's a police officer who's high enough ranking that he has his own office. I don't know if that was a captain. I don't know, but he had his own office. And Peter is sitting in a chair in the hall. The door is open. I'm sitting in a chair in front of the desk of this policeman. And the policeman asked me how my uncle is doing. And he knew my uncle by name. Well, my uncle was one of my offenders, he and his wife. So the second he said my uncle's name and didn't ask me about him, I knew that he was an abuser, that he was in the ring. He was one of them. So he didn't say, let's get your mom and dad on the phone, or who's that guy, or anything. He just, how's your uncle? How's Ray doing? I knew I knew he was one of them.
Now, you mentioned your uncle. Had he already done anything to you? Your uncle at that time? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So many abusers. But my uncle had sexually abused me multiple times, and his wife. And he had a couple of children from a previous marriage, and a daughter from a current marriage. And the school teachers knew that he was sexually abusing the children from his first marriage. And so they went around the law, took up a collection, and put the children on a flight to Florida to live with their birth mother. Just sort of under the table. Right. This is what we did. But his current wife's daughter, their daughter, was still in the home.
Okay.
I didn't know that he was sexually abusing her as well at the time, but he was one of my offenders, and one of many other people were sexually abused by him.
That's interesting, and with his daughter, we'll come to that point because I know exactly which point that happens. But I wanted to just highlight now at this point is that your uncle, it's interesting how he was an offender, but then your dad had those tendencies as well, sort of, you know what I mean? So did they only have two brothers, like your...
My mother's side of the family came from extreme poverty, in and out of foster homes, sexual abuse, beatings, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that was Uncle Ray, my mom's brother.
Oh, it's your
Yeah.
maternal side.
My
Okay, got it.
father's side were wealthy Bostonians, well-educated, and my dad really, it was the oldest of the two boys, and he really didn't like the pomp and circumstance of the Bostonian way of life, so he decided to be an electrician and live in Maine and Florida.
Okay.
And have that kind of life, which was very different than my uncle, who was wealthy, married wealth, two girls, living in Wellesley, Massachusetts, very high end, very classy.
Yeah.
We were like the Beverly Hillbillies, and he was, very wealthy. So two brothers, very different.
Yeah.
And their mother, my grandmother, was the love. I was the first daughter, first granddaughter, and I was really loved by her.
Okay.
Yeah. So with Peter, where I know the situation I'm in at the police station, and we walk out, and he's like, I told you, we're everywhere. And so it was really, drilled in. There was a lot of subculture rules. So if you are Jewish, if you are Catholic, if you are Buddhist, there are cultures. If you're a tennis player, if you're a basketball player, that you have a culture and a language that is, and rules that are unique to your culture. And in the world, there are subcultures. There are street rules. And in prostitution and sex trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, maybe it's the same for prostitution, I don't know. But there are really strict rules that are as firm as there's a stoplight, your car's supposed to stop, The rules in sex trafficking was you're not allowed to talk to another pimp. If you talk to another pimp, he can take your money away. I mean, it's sort of like a vampire thing, you never give permission for a vampire to enter your home, kind of. That's what I akined it to. You can't let another pimp into your home if your pimp's not there. Like, there's all these rules. And they tried to tell me those rules, and yet I, came from a family that said, come on in. When my dad would do breakfast in Maine, there'd be all kinds of people having coffee and smoking cigarettes and talking, So one night, two pimps came to, or at least one of them was a pimp, came to the door. Peter was not home. I was half asleep in my jammies, and these two guys asked if Peter was there, and I said, no, he's not here. I'm not sure, when he's coming. And then I made the fatal flaw of saying, do you want to come in? And as soon
Being polite.
Soon as I said, do you want to come in and wait for him, or whatever I said, that I broke the rule. And the rule is punishable by whatever that pimp, he can take all of your money, he can do what he wants, and your pimp can't do anything to him.
Yeah.
So as soon as I said that, one of them just shoved me and threw me on the couch, and the two of them ripped off my clothes and my jammies and took turns raping me. And as I'm laying there feeling these two men, I'm trying not to get wounded, so if you can't get out of it, at least try not to be wounded. So I'm trying not to be wounded, and all I'm thinking is Peter going to come here and find me deserving of going to Lowell, Massachusetts? And that's just terrifying.
Who's the pimp in Lowell, Massachusetts?
Pepper.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a whole string.
Okay.
Even today, if you take a map of highways, there is a web of homes with sex trafficked people all over the world, not just the United States, all over the world.
Yeah.
So, and he had his his locations. So that was a brutal situation, but Peter did come home, and he felt like what had happened to me was punishment enough. So the two guys did not get into trouble. I didn't have to go to Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, I don't know where this book came from. I don't remember. But there was some book about witchcraft nearby. And I just, while the two guys were there talking to Peter, I like picked up that book and I was looking at it. And the two guys obviously had family history with voodoo and witchcraft, and they freaked out. They started yelling at me, saying, "Don't you think about hexing me? My grandmother will hex you." And I had this moment of power, like, they are afraid of me.
Just because you were holding a witchcraft book.
And I was thrilled in the moment. So I didn't say anything. I didn't say, I don't know. I just didn't say a word. And that was a wonderful moment for me. But there were lots of different rules and stuff. You were supposed to be able to share if you had more clients. You're supposed to share with other girls, preferably your pimps has enough women. One time a nice hotel had 5 hunters, and I was supposed to meet the other girls there to provide sexual services for these 5 hunters, and none of the girls showed up. It was just me. And the 5 guys didn't care. They wanted to have sex with somebody other than their wife, even though I was probably as old as or younger than their daughters. And one man was particularly violent. He liked to bite through the skin. He liked to be able to get through the skin. And the other couple of guys were just normal. They didn't do that. And one guy had guilt. Are you okay? Do you need help? Is somebody making you do that, kind of thing? And I said, well, I'm in trouble with your friend. Could you make him stop biting me? So the other guys made him stop biting me. And I have to convince this guy that this is my idea of a good time, is having sex with 5 perfect strangers who like to bite and who are stinky, and and it's quite the acting job. But if you don't, you have to make them think that this is something that you want to do, and they want you to convince them that this is your idea of a good time, because you need to get paid, because if you don't get paid, there's consequences. And the consequences could be Lowell, Massachusetts, so you have to put on your best game show and survive that moment.
What would you think your success formula was, and not in being trafficked or, prostitution, but what was your success formula in avoiding death, and also getting into deeper trouble? Because would you constitute it to the fact that you were just oblivious, or another thing that came up as you were talking is it because you were a really good actress? Like, what element of success do these girls that go through this is really the acting that is, because you were also saying in the beginning that you couldn't get intoxicated to go through these experiences. So
right.
Did that actually help you?
It did.
Yeah.
It helped me in the short term because I was able to think, which is a part of, my mentality now is I don't like being out of control. I don't like anything affecting my mind, because if I need to MacGyver, so every situation was being able to think, have critical thinking, and figure out how to survive that moment. And so you need to be clear-headed and be able to adjust and survive. So first is don't die. Second thing is survive with the least amount of injury to your body as possible. and your mind. And then the consequences, make sure that, you know, you do what's required so you don't have consequences. So those were sort of the, you know, the thought process in that. And if girls are, I mean, I get why you want to be intoxicated or high to, you know, to go through it. I get it. But that wasn't an option for me, so that was a blessing and a
curse.
I don't know about curse, but you know, I remember, you know, 99% of every awful thing that was done. And then in the surviving part, which we'll talk about later, I couldn't tolerate antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication. So I had to go through the healing and remembering and feeling all of that stuff where it wasn't safe to feel then, feel later, and not take anything for that.
Yeah.
So that period of time with Peter was, you know, that was really crazy, just being put in situations like at his home. They had a babysitter, and after the babysitter, after the kids went to bed, Peter's like, I want you to seduce the babysitter. So it was, you know, in a certain way where he could see, and, you know, I felt so bad for the babysitter. You know, I didn't do anything against her will, but I conned her, I talked her into being sexual with me, full force, you know, and I would never have done that on my own volition. I never would have done any of the stuff that positions I was put in. And there were other girls, and one girl disappeared. She was the second place that I lived. There was a girl, and her mother had been a working girl, and now her daughter was a working girl, and there was something physically wrong with her where she couldn't do penetration, and we found that out, and within a week of finding that it was physically something wrong, she disappeared. So I don't know where she went or what happened to her. But the second place that I was living, was a newly divorced person that Peter had conned into not only her being a house mother, you know, watching over us, but also she had property, and he cut down her trees and, you know, sold her trees. So, you know, it just, every opportunity to make money. It was always about making money.
Yeah. And all the girls, were they all around the same age as you? No one was over 18?
None of the girls that I saw, and they kind of kept me away from Pepper's girls. One girl I saw, you know, first meeting them at the apartment, and then later on I saw one girl later on, and her arm was in a cast. You know, Peter had broken, or Pepper had broken her arm. So they try not to do anything to the face. That, you know, you need to still be able to be sexual. And there was lots of different ways of controlling the girls. You know, Salt used Lowell, Massachusetts for me, but somebody else it might be physical violence. It might be with getting you addicted to drugs and then withholding the drugs, whatever they needed to do.
They know their audience.
They know their audience, yeah.
So how did you finally leave?
And I just had a conversation with God, and I just sort of out loud, there's nobody around, I just out loud, I just said, you know, I really want to die. And I just started walking down the street, which sounds so easy, but it was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. It was, looking back, one of the pivotal times in my life, one of the real turning points in my lifetime so far. So I had this dream that, and I don't know how to, I don't really know how to explain it, other than I wasn't seeing a movie, but it was like an impression on my mind that was saying, you need to get to the hospital now. They're not going to let you in to the room. They're not going to easily let you into the hospital room. You need to be bold and fight to get in the hospital room. It's imperative that you get into the hospital room.